Alrighty, so I'd like to welcome everybody to another SLG Azure Fridays event. Today we have Steve Reed, who's going to be presenting on what is my cost to move to the cloud, and he's going to show you how to basically estimate and get a good understanding of what it would look like to take your on-premises data center environment and lift and shift it into the cloud, and also help you identify maybe those workloads that would be less risky to bring to the cloud. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Steve Reed.
All right, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And good afternoon and good morning, wherever time zone you might be. My name is Steve Reed, like Mike said. I am an Azure architect, and I work with Microsoft state and local government customers. Specifically, my patch is down in the Southeast, but I'm here to talk to you about a tool that is used across the United States. And the name of the tool is called StratoZone. So you might be wondering, why is somebody from Microsoft talking about a tool called StratoZone that's not a Microsoft software asset? And the reason is because the entire organization that is responsible for, working with customers to see that they can get the most out of the cloud has been given access to this tool. The tool's called StratoZone, and my goal today is to kind of walk you through what that tool can do for you as far as getting a handle on your on-prem footprint, your environment, and most importantly, what that might look like if you wanted to make the cloud journey and go into Azure. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the agenda that I came up with. Pretty straightforward here. What we wanted to do was look at what StratoZone is, right? Exactly what is this tool? Then kind of walk through what it actually does and what it looks like. And then after that, if that's compelling enough, hopefully, then we'll get into, all right, hey, this looks interesting. What do I do next? How do I actually leverage this tool moving forward? So let's go ahead and get started.
Hey, Steve.
So what is StratoZone?
Hey, Steve.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Could you share your screen?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was shared. Let me know if you can see that.
It is loading. And it just popped up on my side.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So let's go. I'm going to go back just to show you the agenda and what we're going to go through here. What is StratoZone? Discovery and analysis walkthrough, kind of look at what the tool does, and then actually hop into the next steps. So, all right, here's where we were. Customer needs. Essentially, if you are toying around or thinking about moving some workloads to the cloud, you are going to have to go through these particular action items right here. And at the top, let's just kind of go through these. You're going to have to know what your environment's like. Hopefully, you already have an idea of what your on-prem footprint looks like, what the different servers are, and the makeup of that. Most folks typically do, and they keep that in some kind of tool like System Center, perhaps, or maybe a spreadsheet, or there's lots of other tools that are out there. But then what this tool is going to do is it's actually going to leverage that and then come back and give us a cloud assessment. And what that's going to help is it's going to help us decide what goes where, and also what do we want to look at moving first, right? Maybe the lower risk workloads, or what typically there's a procedure to actually doing this, and this tool actually helps us do that. The other thing is that for some of the hardware and just the environments that you might have on-prem, some of them actually, let's just face it, if they're really, really old and 32-bit and obsolete OSs, you can't move those to Azure, right? Because there are some things that Azure does not run, and this tool helps you get an idea of that. So it helps you also sort of look at what is really a good fit as far as Azure is concerned and what's not. Most importantly, it's going to help you get a handle on the cost. So at a granular level, this tool is going to come down to each machine and tell you exactly what that machine would cost to run in Azure. So at a high level, that's what it does. The other thing here is that there's, aside from all the other things that go in by a machine basis, we also have to look at, all right, this machine talks to this machine, talks to this machine, that's called a dependency. So this tool is going to help us get a handle on the actual dependencies for a particular machine that we might be looking at. Also, what's running on that machine? Hopefully, we have an inventory and we can have a pretty good idea of what's running on these. But if you're managing 700 servers, having an idea of what's on each of those servers, it's going to be pretty crucial, because we want to know exactly what that's going to look like when we're running it up in Azure. I already mentioned the financial modeling, and really what this tool will allow you to do is sort of come up with a best fit as far as what you're looking to get out of Azure, and sort of help you model that from a migration standpoint. All right, there are tools that do this already that are out there, but none of them are really providing an end-to-end solution like StratoZone. That's why the Microsoft field really is leveraging this tool, and I myself have done quite a few of these, and I got to tell you, there's been customers love this. The other thing that I'll mention here, you'll hear me mention it a couple of times, but everything you're going to see with this tool, there's no cost to it. You just have to tell us that you want to do it, and we can actually make that happen. So keep that in mind. The problem, again, like I said, there's no real clear end-to-end solution. So this tool does provide that. And then there's other ways to do that as far as consulting engagements, but those are typically kind of hard to manage. And that's sort of the reason that there's a lot of emphasis on this tool. So the solution here is to first discover and analyze, and that's really what we're going to focus on today. We're going to look at, how you kick this off, let it come back and analyze your network and all the machines that are on that. The second part, which we're not really going to get into, we're going to touch on it a little bit today, but it's the planning and the roadmap. So once we know what the known set is, then we can maybe put together a nice plan and a roadmap with adoption and what things we want to do first and what things we want to do after that. And then actually the great part of this tool is it actually automates a lot of the migration. Using tools like Azure Site Recovery, we can actually migrate these VMs up to Azure relatively easily. So it makes that part that much more easier. If you did not have a tool like this, you obviously would have to go and scrape all these tools together, have a lot of different people to actually, you'd have to have your networking folks, maybe your app dev folks and your database folks, and come together to actually give you a clear sort of idea of what your footprint looks like. It's typically a big lift to actually do this, and this tool, just from the analysis standpoint alone, is streamlines that entire process. And it's important to actually streamline that process, because the way best to understand this slide, if we come back and we have a bunch of disjointed processes when we're trying to go to the cloud, we have to stitch those together, and that typically that means it's going to be somewhat disjointed in Azure, right? Because it's kind of what garbage in, garbage out. If we have a not well-defined process on-prem, and we have a bunch of disjointed efforts to actually move to the cloud, then typically managing that in Azure is going to be harder, right? And the intent here is that if we're able to come in and do this analysis all beforehand, then it actually streamlines the cost, improves the return on investment, and makes the whole process of moving to Azure a lot more streamlined. So really, the things that we're going to hop into when we go through this tool is analysis, understand your environment, like I said, plan for the roadmap, look at the cost savings. It's going to be the third thing that we really look at, and then actually create a migration plan to actually do that. So let's go ahead and hop into it, how it actually works. So what you're seeing here is sort of a high-level process flow of the Stratus Own Assessment, as we like to call it. And the first part of here, as you can see over down here, where you have 10, yeah?
We're just seeing your slide deck.
Yeah, I'm still showing slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were showing your I apologize. I thought you were showing your screen.
Yeah, not yet. I'm going to. That part's coming. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of go through the flow here, and then I'm going to show you what it actually looks like. So here we start the assessment. I'm going to show you this whole process of how we like to do this. And there's a process that we have in place that's working rather nicely with customers. You will install something called a collector. And the collector is going to run, it's going to run anywhere from 3 hours to 30 days. All right, you decide that. Typically what we recommend is 7 days. to actually gather that information. You can see up here, it's going to put all that inside a data warehouse that it's going to expose through a portal, and you're going to have access to actually look at that portal. And then after 7 days, typically what we like to do is just circle back with the customers and actually look at the results. And then that leads to, okay, what do we want to move, or discussions like that. So what I'm going to do right now is show some screenshots, and then I'm going to hop into the portal and show you actually what it looks like. So discover and analysis. When you come into this tool, you'll be presented with a screen that looks like this. And you can notice that you can create new assessments, or you can go into analyze and look at existing assessments. I'm going to show you all this in the portal just a little bit, but I wanted to just get you familiar with the process flow. The next thing here, if you look at the summary, and this is typically what you're going to look at after you run an assessment, after the 7 days, and you can see here what it's going to do is it's going to show you the total number of assets that we scanned, that we looked at. It's going to break those up as far as are they Windows or Linux. So we can do obviously Linux and Windows workloads. It's a little different how you scan each one of those. And I'll touch on that when we get into actually how you do this. The bottom line here is with Windows, it's really simple. It leverages WMI, but you do have to have credentials to log on to the Windows machine. With Linux, it's SSH to actually do that. And typically that's something that IT administrators would have. The Analyze dashboard does a couple of other things that are worth pointing out here. It shows you the age of your OS. So here you can see we have a lot of OSs that are within the 3 to 5 years old, and then we kind of scale off down to the 7 years plus. We also take a look at the total number of cores. So for all of these 25 assets, these machines, we have 38 cores that are in there. And then from the total memory capacity, that's 151 gigabytes, and storage here we have 4.7 terabytes. So this is the total profile. This is pretty, from a high level standpoint, this is what your actual footprint as far as compute, memory, storage, and networking, not really networking, but storage would actually look like in Azure. So let's get a little more granular. Now we can actually get into the types of OSs that we have out there and the memory distribution across these. If you had a tool like System Center already installed and you were monitoring your data center, you would probably have access to a lot of this information. So a lot of times when people look at this, they go, yeah, well, this is something that I probably already have, or I could get this tool, but it does sort of validate that, right? When you look at this, you can see that, yeah, this is my environment. This tool actually went out and collected this information that I know, and it makes sense. And then if you want to get down to a very granular level, you can go in and look at each particular machine. So here, this is called inventory. And from inventory, you can see the name of each server. I'm going to show you how we actually scan all these towards the end when we hop out of the slides here. But in the corresponding IP address, it'll also give you the breakdown of the OS that's running on that, the number of CPUs, the number of NICs, the amount of storage. You can sort of glean and you can scroll down here and you can hop in. If you click on any one of these, you can hop in and actually look at the rolling average day over day of what the IOPS and the memory usage is. So this is nice because it can show you the peaks and valleys for your workloads that you have on your IT on-prem environment. And then the next thing that this will do is it will actually come back and try to map each of these machines to a machine in Azure. And what it does is it uses a best fit approach where it scans the OS, it scans the hardware, the amount of CPUs, the amount of disk space, the amount of storage space, and it matches that up on a best fit with what's available in Azure. Let's face it, Azure has a lot of VMs, but it doesn't have every VM known to mankind, right? So what it will do is it will actually create this thing. If you can see this up at the top, it's called a StratoFit score. And you can tweak with this. You can actually, customize this however you want. It uses more or less kind of a t-shirt size approach to, take a given machine and actually match that up with Azure, what's available in Azure. And what it does is it comes up with a high, medium, and low ranking. So obviously high means that we had a really good fit for some VMs that are available in Azure. Medium, so we can still do that. Low is typically machines that they're going to need. Let's face it, they're going to need some remediation. These could be older machines where the hardware is not supported up in Azure, or the OS might not be supported up in Azure, right? So, and that in and of itself is pretty valuable, because you might actually have some machines that you want to move. I actually was talking with a customer. They had some file servers, but they were just ancient. They were like 2003, and we knew that before we could actually think about moving it to Azure, we had to actually mitigate that and upgrade their file servers. So I'll pause real quick and see if there's any questions. And it doesn't look like there are, so I'm going to continue. So how can you customize this? There's a inside the tool, you can actually customize how important particular features of a VM are to you. And based on this mapping that you define here is how it actually matches up. What is a good fit? What's a medium fit? The other thing that it will allow you to do is actually go in and customize your data center and your compute cost. Essentially, the way that this tool works, when we get into it and look at it, is you have your private data center, and you might have multiple data centers. You might have, I have a customer that has 4 different data centers. Each one is actually run somewhat differently, and we can actually use that to compare that against Azure pricing on all of that. And eventually, we're going to get to something where we're going to want to see the cost, right? And this is probably what I find to be the most compelling and the most interesting to customers, is where we take these data centers and we gather up all the metrics and how much it's going to cost, and we come back with this, which is the Strato Match comparison of how much is it going to cost me to run in Azure versus on-prem. And you can see here, based on the servers that we had scanned, the compute cost, what we know normally and keep in mind what this tool is actually putting into this calculation is the ping, power, pipe, the facilities management, everything that goes into keeping these machines running, and it gives us the compute cost. And here we have the total compute cost, and you can see here the total compute cost up in Azure is much less, and it gives us the actual savings, which is $5,000 a month. And keep in mind, this is on a monthly cost, and this is running in. Another nice thing about this tool is that it lets us do this for each particular region. So if you're in Azure Government, you can get the pricing for Azure Government. If you want to do commercial, you can get the pricing for commercial as well. So this is pretty compelling. This actually takes everything that we've scanned and some of the information you may already have, but taking this to the next step is that we can now actually go in and look at what this is going to actually cost up in Azure per month. And we can also go into this tool and look at what each server, what the makeup is of this $1,500 over here. So one other thing that I'd like to show you before I actually go in and show you some demo here is you may or may not be familiar with something called Platform as a Service within Azure. Don't really want to get too in the weeds of what Platform as a Service is, but just think of it as it's a really more cost-effective way to run workloads like web apps, web servers, and databases. There's Azure Web Apps, which allows you to take existing websites, be they Apache, IIS, and actually run those in the PaaS offering. And same with SQL Server. So you can take your SQL Server databases that are running on a SQL Server and actually port those to PaaS. And the cost savings is actually pretty astonishing sometimes. The nice thing about Platform as a Service is that you get away from actually managing server CALs and server, not CALs, but core licensing and things like that, and you get into this concept of a service plan, which is typically much more cost effective. So let's hop out of this and actually see what the portal actually looks like. I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and I've created a generic customer here. And for this customer, this is what you would see. So if you so choose to run this tool, you would be presented with this, and then typically you're going to want to go to Analyze. You can kind of see this is, you already saw a lot of this, but this is, the number of servers that we had, 150 Windows servers, the inventory management over here. I can dive into this and go into any one of these servers and actually get some really good information as far as what's running on that. One of the other things that I didn't really talk about was dependency mapping. I talked about it in general briefly, but let me just kind of show you what that looks like, because this is very useful. Here you can see I have a number of servers that I'm responsible for, or on my scan. I'm going to go here and pick one that looks like it might be, this looks like it might be a file server. So what this is doing is it's actually showing you, this wasn't the best one to pick, but you can see it's showing you that there's a lot of unscanned devices that are hitting this. Let me find one that's a little better to look at. Oops, another one. I'm not picking the best ones here. Let me see if I can find another one that has multiple servers attached to it. Well, I have a screenshot we'll show you. The bottom line is if this machine was talking to other servers, we would actually be able to see that. This is important because when we're thinking about moving this to Azure, we would actually really have to entertain the idea of moving all those different servers or those other servers as well. Imagine a web server talking to a database or something along those lines. So the other thing to keep in mind here, this is the reports. And from the reports, you can actually go into any one of these and actually get detailed information on this, cloud spend, inventory. All of these will actually produce a report like this that you can actually go in and actually share with management or however you want to approach that. So I'm going to go back to the slide deck and get into the process for this. So once we've done this and we've looked at the analysis, the next thing that we really need to do is get into, all right, the planning phase, right? You might have seen that on the portal when we were looking at the plan phase of this. Typically, what you want to do is you want to come up with a timeline like this where you want to entertain, moving particular workloads up. A lot of times at my travels, dev test environments are really popular for moving up. Maybe you have a line of business system and you're really thinking about moving that dev test environment up to Azure because it's super cost effective to mimic exactly what production looks like and actually have a complete environment, spin them up in actually a matter of minutes that mimic production and let the developers have something that's reliable and close to what they actually need for doing their revs and their changes. And then maybe later on down the road, we might get into production servers. And there could be other things here as well. Maybe there's storage, but this lets you actually at least sort of have a timeline approach and actually have a phased approach to how you want to do this. So what are the next steps with this tool? One of the things that we really like to sort of use to position cloud adoption with Azure is this metaphor of crawl, walk, run. You'll hear a lot of folks from Microsoft refer to this, and it's a good analogy in that it helps you understand. Obviously the cloud is something that you need to adopt and move to as it makes sense, and that's why you can see here the way we position StratoZone is with a roadmap, and it's step number one. And the reason it's step number one is because what it does is it actually takes a lot of the ambiguity out of the conversation. If we were to come and talk about Azure and the different features and benefits of what you could maybe leverage in Azure, a lot of times customers will go, yeah, that's great. How much does it cost? And this really addresses that particular aspect of that. And then there's the next conversation is, do you want to be in Azure Commercial or Azure Government? That's typically decided upon the types of workloads that you want to run in Azure. We have something called Azure Foundations, which is a prescriptive way to actually set Azure up. And then the next thing, probably the most important, is to get into actually connecting Azure to your data center. And this is the site-to-site VPN. Really, once we get to step 4, you can see StratoZone is the first step here. Once we get to step 4, we've actually attached and have made Azure a part of your data center. So now we can actually start looking at all these different things that you might want to do with Azure. Backup, Store Simple, Log Analytics, which we're not going to get into any of this on this call, but it sort of opens the conversation. So a lot of these things that you see that are up in Azure, some of the more racier things over in analytics and IoT, we actually, it's a lot easier to implement that because we've laid our foundation, and we know exactly what our costs are going to be, and we're not going to be blindsided by anything. So we find that this StratoZone plays really well in this whole strategy. So what are the next steps? Reach out to your Microsoft representative. I'm going to show you, I'll hop back out of the slides real quick, and I want to show you a Prereq email that I send out, and please let me know if you're interested. My email is on the front of this presentation. I'm happy to route any questions to the appropriate account representative. In the Prereq email, you'll see, I'm going to go through that. There's some things that need to be in place before you actually run the collector, and that's what bullet number 3 is, which is installing the collector. There's some requirements that are necessary for the collector. I'll touch on those briefly. Another thing that I find myself saying ad nauseum sometimes, a lot of times when people are kicking off the collector, the default is on demand. On demand just runs once and then goes to sleep, so it pings the machines. I'll touch on what that means. You definitely want to run on schedule, and we'll touch on that in just a little bit. So that's kicking it off, and then the part B of all this is to actually have a meeting to go over the results, right? What did this find? And then based on that, creating a migration plan and seeing what's the best way to plan your adoption of Azure, and what are the best workloads to look at. And keep in mind, this is all free of charge for you to leverage. We don't do anything with the data. It's there if you want to use it. So let me go and show you the Prereq email just to show you what it looks like. This is the way that I send this out. A lot of other folks do something very similar. If you do want to use this tool, you would be set up in the portal, and you would get an email like this that I would send out before we actually set you up. The most important thing in this email would be this CSV file. Let me just load this up so you can see what it looks like. It's just a really simple CSV file that has a list of all of the machines that you want to scan and the corresponding IP address. So you can see this is what they call it, asset name, and this is the corresponding IP address. This lets you have a lot of fidelity and control over the machines that you want to scan, because maybe you have it in your mind, I want to scan these machines, I don't want to scan all my machines, and you can definitely do that with this CSV file. I should mention that another way to do this is you can, using the collector, do what's called a port scan. So you can just do an IP address range, in which case you don't need the CSV file, and you can just say, I want you to go out and scan everything that's in my network. It's a good idea to bring in somebody from, like myself, like an Azure architect or somebody, when you do want to do that, because sometimes you can pick up desktops. I've seen that happen a number of times, and typically you don't want to move those up to Azure. You just want to focus on the server, so it's important to understand how that all works together. There's also a document here that lets you understand what the whole process is, kind of just explains the prereqs, things like that. This link here will take you to a really good walkthrough of how to install the collector. This is up on the StratoZone website. And it'll walk you through, you're going to get something in the email, you'll download that, probably a process very similar to things that you've seen before. You install the collector, it has a code that you have to give it here to actually activate it. A couple of things I'll mention as far as, the prereqs for this. It does have to be on a Windows Server 2008 R2 or higher, or desktop version Windows 7 64-bit or higher. It does have to have the .NET Framework 4.6.1 installed, and it has some requirements for disk space as well. The thing to keep in mind here is that what's very important about when you install the collector is that the machine has to stay running for the duration of your assessment. So you can't turn it off. If you turn it off, you turn off the assessment. It also cannot go into power save mode. I've seen that cause issues. So typically you want to put it on a server, or if you're putting it on a desktop, take all the power saving off. It'll do Windows assets and Linux assets like we mentioned. It typically is bound by what I would call a network segment. And if there are machines, if you have multiple firewalls or segmented networks, typically the best solution for that is to have two different set of collectors, one that runs on one segment and the other that runs on the other, rather than punching holes in your firewall. This just kind of walks you through, actually setting it up and then kicking it off. There is one thing that I wanted to show you here. This talks about, and this is all again in the Prereq email and up on the website. Manually, you can actually just actually type manually in the asset name and IP address. I don't see anybody ever do that. CSV is by far the most popular. You saw the CSV file, and then there's also bulk scan, like I mentioned. This kind of walks you through how to do that. What I wanted to show you was the actual scheduling, which is right. We must have gone past it. Here we go. Here we go. You can barely see it, but over here, this is the schedule. You don't, on demand is typically a red flag. You're going to want to click on over here on the collector and select on schedule, and then it will show you the schedule. Typically, the way that it works is that every 20 minutes, the machine, the collector, will ping all the assets that you want it to with a very lightweight message. That's another question that comes up a lot is what's the network traffic on this? It's very lightweight. It's a 2K message every 20 minutes that it sends to the machine, and the machine sends an acknowledgement back. So it's pretty straightforward. So that, in essence, is the StratoZone tool. And I'll take it back to here and open it up for any questions that might be out there. You can type them in the IAM window or come off of mute.
So Steve, real quick, as you said on there, there's no cost. So if they wanted to do this, the best way is to reach out to their account executive and ask for a Stratus Own Assessment, and then they would get the right people involved to go through these steps. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. Great point, Mike. Yeah, so reach out to, hopefully you know who your Microsoft account representative is. If not, reach out to Mike or myself. We can help you track that down. And then we start this process. The thing I like to stress is that we don't do anything with the data. Let me go back to the email real quick, and I want to show you something. This actually is a lot of times, when you show this to networking people, they want something to guarantee that nothing's going to happen with their data, because we're scanning your machines. We put this in a portal that only you can get to. And truth be told, and whoever is running the Stratus Own Assessment, so somebody like me would have access, just to make sure that we enforce security. This document that's also in the Prereq tells you everything about how we collect the data, what we do with it. The bottom line is we don't really do anything with it. We just keep it out on the portal for you to look at. You can run the collector as many times as you want. It is not sold to, you can say it's not sold to any third parties or used in any kind of marketing efforts.
So pretty much the whole purpose of the StratoZone piece, this is to get a good assessment, a good idea of what's in the data center, what kind of servers, operating systems, the dependencies, all of those things that would maybe help you make a better informed decision about moving things to the cloud. And then it also can give you some ideas on cost. So those are so that's kind of the big benefit of StratoZone. Is there anything else I'm missing?
No, well, aside from that, everything you just said, and then it also allows you to start planning your adoption of Azure, right, where it makes sense. Because, most folks are going to look at Azure and they're going to say, well, there are some things I'm willing to run, and I want to know how much they're going to cost. So to your point, yeah, StratoZone is going to help me get an idea and put some dollars behind that. And then also there might be other workloads where maybe, if I test the waters, I like it, I can plan and actually, move different workloads. So it also has a planning element. And then the final part of this is that, let's just say you want to, and this does happen where people do what's called a lift and shift, right? Lights out on the on-prem data center. I want to take my entire data center and move it up into Azure and run the whole thing. I'm all in on the cloud. So the tool also helps with that as far as automation and migration using tools like Azure Site Recovery. So
on the cost part, where it's showing the price differences or how much I could possibly save by putting things in Azure, how does it know how much my costs are?
Great question. So you can go in and actually under the plan, let me see if I might not have it set up for this particular customer. You can go into the plan element of this, or phase of this. And then you go to StratoMap over here. And what you can do is you can actually, it's Strato Match, I believe. You can customize your data center. So I haven't done that, but essentially what this allows you to do is come in and actually, if you know what your costs are, your power costs and things like that, you can actually customize your data center so that it actually more accurately reflects your cost. A good example here, you can see power and cooling. And by default, this is going to use, this is not set up yet, so that's why this is all empty. By default, it uses industry averages. So it just, it doesn't know any better. It's just going to use industry averages, and it figures that's going to work for most folks. But I was recently doing this for a customer, and they told me, and I, for whatever reason with the relationship, it was a utilities company. They didn't have power and cooling. They didn't have power and cooling costs because that was covered under a different agency. So that was obviously going to make their on-prem cost a lot less. So we can go in and actually customize that so it more reflects what your on-prem data costs are.
Okay.
Great question.
So pretty much just out of the box, it's going to give you industry standards.
Correct. It's going to give you, yeah. It looks at what it does is it looks at the number of servers. Like here, if you go to, we go back to the dashboard, it'll look at the number of servers. Let me come back out of this. It'll look at this and say, all right, you're a medium to small data center, and then t-shirt size fit that. As opposed to if you had 5,000 servers, right? Because those are typically just, there's economies of scale, but there's a lot more money typically involved in running those. So yeah, it does sort of right size that based on the number of servers.
And on the lower left there, it says installed software, 956 apps. Does it actually tell me what those apps are?
It actually does. So you can go over to installed software, and what this will do is you can pick on any one of these and actually see here we have Bill Quick on this one, config manager, client setup, and we can just look at everything that's installed on this particular server. Silverlight.
So that's how it's going through, and when you looked at the PaaS piece, it's looking at that and saying here are things that are on that server that might fit in PaaS. Is that kind of what it's doing, or?
Yeah, and what it does with PaaS, I mean, full disclosure here, what it does with PaaS is it lets you know if it's a good fit for PaaS. So if it finds actually, if we go over here, I think there's there's a report for PaaS, Cloud Fit PaaS. And what this does is it looks at it and it goes, hey, these are a really good fit for your web servers and your SQL Server for PaaS. But that's nice, but it does not actually equate these to what service plan you might want to run. So the costing element for PaaS, it tells you this is a good workload for PaaS. It doesn't really give you in-depth pricing on that, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think probably the reason why on that is what we're seeing a lot, at least I've seen, is that when you move to PaaS, you're moving to smaller sized machines and you get the same performance because you don't have all the overhead of everything else. So, and a lot of times even on-prem, we see machines that are way oversized for what they're actually needed for. So I could see that.
That's a great point because I mean that's something to keep in mind. Typically you have to build a church for Easter, right, for a web server because you got to build it for the high watermark. If you're going to do this on-prem, and what Mike's saying is that in platform as a service, we can scale that up when the load comes, and then we can scale it back, right? And that's what gives you that incredible cost savings. And we can do that for SQL Server and the web server as well.
And I find it interesting too the way that it goes through and kind of, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but back on the VM side where it was giving you what's a good fit or what's not a good fit. I noticed that I think in the server list it gave you basically server sizes. One of the things that I always talk to my customers about is that, if it shows like a medium or low fit and it's because of the server size, not because of the OS, but because of the server size, really reevaluate that. Because in some cases, the server itself might not necessarily be configured appropriately for the workload that's running on it, and it might be a larger machine than what's really needed. However, I do know that StratoZone, as it goes through and it checks, it's checking a lot of things. So this is probably pretty accurate, but it's one of those things to kind of reevaluate. When you're moving virtual machines from on-prem to the cloud, if you see that your on-prem machine is a certain size and StratoZone saying, well, this is a different size, which is smaller, that you should be going into, that's probably very accurate. You shouldn't be concerned about that, because most of the cases that we've seen, when you move into the cloud, you can go to a smaller size virtual machine. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is usually the hardware that's in the cloud is a newer generation. So from a CPU perspective, you might be able to go with less cores, but actually still have the same amount of processing capability that you had on-prem. Obviously, memory is a different situation. That would be more just based on utilization.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And what I was thinking when you were saying that is that, the beauty of the cloud is that if you find out that your machine was a little too small, you can up that just by going in and configuring that, and it's super easy to do. So I like to call that right size, right? So this tool allows you to right size the actual hardware that you want to run a particular workload on. I finally found a machine that shows you the dependency mapping. So in lieu of moving the machines up, here we can actually, for all these machines, we can actually see, that we would have to move all of these. Where you see unscanned devices, typically this is somebody that's either, remote desktoping into this, or it could be a web browser, or maybe a web browser is running on this. It's an IP address we don't know about, or it's just in your CSV file, you didn't give it a complete list of all the servers, so it doesn't know what this server is. It's just some IP address that's out there.
But at least it's letting you know that there's something that you might not be aware of that's connecting into that server, which is powerful, I think.
And actually, a true war story that from this tool. This tool can, it's not designed for this, but it can help you find shadow IT, or at least servers that are out there, because as the story goes, there was some people that said there should be no unscanned devices. I gave you all my IP addresses. And so they researched it, and they put basically a monitor on this, and they found out that they actually had some phantom IT that was in their IT shop that was not supposed to be there. So it can't help you find that, but it is definitely, its purpose is first and foremost to help you evaluate your on-prem environments in preparation of moving to the cloud.
Awesome.
All right. So any other questions? You know what I'm going to do? Just real quick. I know they already have your contact info, but if you want to contact me, my address, it's not working now. There we go. Is sreed@microsoft.com. There you go. So hopefully that was interesting. Like I said, it's a great tool. Use it while we have it, and please let us know if we can help set it up for you.
Thank you very much, Steve, and appreciate you presenting today. Just like all of our other events, this will be posted online, hopefully, usually Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week is usually when it is put online at the aka.ms/SLG Azure Fridays URL. You can always go out there and see all of our past events, and this one will be out there. Once again, next week, we've got, well, like I showed earlier, we've got several different events that are coming up over the next several weeks. Definitely go out to the slgevents.azurewebsites.net site to be able to see all of those events that are coming up. I also mentioned that there's some great security events that are coming up, so make sure you register for those. Those are some pretty good ones from our counterparts in the security team. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap everything